Chapter 2 and verse 10, where we read, Esther had not made known her people or her kindred, for Mordecai had commanded her not to make it known. Now we know by this point, we are told that Esther has been taken into the harem, right? So she is now being captive. Mordecai, you can just envision this as they come to get Esther and take her away, maybe, leaning over to give her a hug and whispering in her ear, don't tell anybody that you're a Jew. Now, how could they not tell? I don't know. Was there so much similarity in the way that she looked to the way the Persians looked and they just couldn't tell? I don't know. I know Mordecai is a very common Jewish name, so if Hadassah, which is a common Jewish name, were living with Mordecai, you would assume, if you were their next door neighbors, that, oh, that's the Jewish family next door. Apparently it wasn't common knowledge that these two were Jews, and so Mordecai wanted to keep it that way. And let's look at this. Is there a problem with them being secret Jews? Well, why keep it a secret? Well, you have to remember, they were the minorities. They had been carried out and, exiled over to this land of Persia. So they were the minorities. So just think, even now in our day and age, with the feelings that certain groups of minorities may have, and the uprisings through the years with minorities, and the oppression of minorities, and things haven't changed. This goes way, way back. So keep it a secret just because perhaps they were hated minorities. But then they were Benjaminites. Now, why in the world would that be an issue? I'm so glad you asked, because here comes our history lesson for tonight. And I can't get too hung up in this, but this is where, I kind of said this last week, probably said it the week before, because I say it a lot. If it's mentioned in Scripture, it's mentioned for a reason. And so back up to where we met Mordecai in verse 5 of chapter 2. You remember we looked at this last week, and this kind of gives us his family history, right? He has the son of Yair, the son of Shemi, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite. Well, then let's go over, we're not there yet, we will tonight, but I'm skipping ahead a little bit to verse 15. When the turn came for Esther, the daughter of Abihail, the uncle of Mordecai, who had taken her as his own daughter to go into the king, she asked for nothing. Okay, I thought it was, I read so many different versions, and I thought it was in here too. But it must have been one of the other ones where it says that Abihail, and calls him the Benjaminite, in that version that I read. But we do know that Abihail was Mordecai's uncle, Esther's father. So if Mordecai's great-grandfather was a Benjaminite, then Mordecai was a Benjaminite. Esther's father would have been a Benjaminite, makes Esther a Benjaminite. Okay, so we have it established. They're Benjaminites. Why? Why does that matter? Well, in order to figure out why it matters, I put a little map up here for you. And we're going to have to look at a little history. Way, way, way back in. Now, we are talking, where are we right now in history? About 479, right? According to my timelines. I didn't put it back up. I have gotten teased about my timelines. But we're about 479. So you have to go back in years to about 930 BC. Okay, 500 roughly years. When the nation of Israel split. And it split, if you recall, real quick, Solomon was dying. Solomon was to be followed by Rehoboam. Rehoboam was going to heavily tax everybody, as was done prior to his taking over. And in Solomon's council of people was Jeroboam. And Jeroboam received, did he receive the prophecy in 1 Kings 11, somewhere around in there, that maybe if I looked at some notes, I could get it a little bit better. Yeah, 1 Kings 11. That eventually he would be made king. Now, this didn't settle too well, and so he exiled over to Egypt. When Solomon dies and Rehoboam takes over, and the threat of death is over for Jeroboam, he comes back. And when Rehoboam, who says, things like, my father laid on you a heavy yoke, I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips, I will scourge you with scorpions. You remember that scripture? And it's in 1 Kings 12. So the people responded to this by saying, no, we don't want this. We want Jeroboam, and we're going to go establish our own nation. And that's your northern kingdom, with 10 of your tribes. So then, the ones who stayed were the tribe of Benjamin and the tribe of Judah. Now, if you've got really good eyes, you'll see Jerusalem right there. So now we know, the tribe of Benjamin and Judah had the corner of the market of Jerusalem, right? We got Jerusalem. Well, when the others defected or whatever with Jeroboam, he feared that the people would travel to Jerusalem to worship, and that would be, awful, because they might decide that they're going to stay, and that's going to, he would lose people to go back down there. So he establishes his own temples and his own worship up in that area. Where's my thing? And this whole region up in here is called the Samaritan region. So they are Samaritans. And so they established worship centers in Bethel and in Dan. And they built calves. They incorporated all kinds of pagan worship, because in the prophecy prior to Jeroboam having to leave and go into exile in Egypt, he was told, and if we had time, we could look at all these scriptures. He's like, if you will have a kingdom, and if you follow the laws of God, God will expand your kingdom like never before. But if you don't, God will take your kingdom away. Well, not wanting his people to go down and worship in Jerusalem was problem number one. They established, some pagan influences in their worship. They stayed up in the Samaritan region to have their temple and whatnot. So judgment came in 722 when the Assyrians came and attacked the northern kingdom. Now, they came, infiltrated. They had decimated all, like what happened with Jerusalem. They just stayed. And so there was all this intermarrying with the Assyrians and the Jews, to the point that now your Jews down here in Benjamin, the Judean region, considered the ones up here as only half Jews. And there was all kinds of conflict. It was awful. And more pagan influences and whatnot. And I think the story of that, and of course memory is a bad thing, but the story of that is, I think Jeroboam eventually dies. I think his son ends up getting murdered. And in the course of his son being murdered as ruler, the entire family was decimated. And the complete line of Jeroboam was wiped out. In keeping with the prophecy that if you follow my ways and you worship me as your God, I will expand your kingdom. He did not, and God took it all out. So then we get to where we started this class and the destruction of Jerusalem. So we went from 722, where you had your Assyrian attack up here, to 605, 597, 586, I think were your 3 dates for the destruction of Jerusalem. Right here, and it was this sector of Jews, the pure Jews, that were taken over to Babylon. Why did God have that happen? Because they had left him too, right? And we remember in that first lesson, we tracked, starting in Genesis, the prophecy that God had. You don't keep my covenant, I'm going to scatter you. And as it got closer to time, the prophecy got more and more and more specific as to how that scattering was going to take place, right? And so the scattering took place by ripping them up out of their homelands and sending them over to Persia or Babylon under the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. Now, while, this really has a point, okay, I promise. While they're in Persia, for how long was that? The captivity was how long? 70 years. While they're over there, it's theorized that some of these up here, notice, hey, nobody's there. If they were taken if they were taken hostage, they went over to Persia or Babylon. If they managed to get away, they kicked over that way to Egypt. See? So now we're kind of sparse with people. It's a really nice area. So some of those from the Samaritan region start to sift on down and into territory that they're not supposed to be in, right? So when Cyrus releases the Jews with his edict and says, okay, you can go back and you can build the temple back. They go in waves, but about 50,000 go first. They get over there and they start to work on the temple. Well, guess who they meet when they get over there? But these half Jews who did not meet them very kindly. And there was a conflict over in Jerusalem for years. And this I got to show you. Can you look at Ezra chapter 4? And this will make the Bible come alive just a little bit more to you, having known now the background. Look at Ezra 4. So your waves of Jews are going back to establish the temple. And it says, now, when the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin, makes sense? Those are the two tribes we're talking about, heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of fathers' houses and said to them, let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do. Really? Really? I don't think so. And we've been sacrificing to him ever since the days of Esarhaddon, the king of Assyria, who brought us here. But Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the rest of the heads of the fathers' houses in Israel said to them, you have nothing to do with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus, the king of Persia, has commanded us. Let me just ask you something. Just getting that little bit of history, and then you go back and you read this. Does that make a whole lot more sense and come alive a little bit more in your reading to know that? I love that when that happens. Now, we can't read the whole chapter because this is an Esther study and this is Ezra. But I want you just to glance down with me, though. If you look at verse 4, the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah and made them afraid to build. And it said, and they bribed counselors against them to frustrate their purpose. And then you look down in verse 6, and in the reign of Ahasuerus, in the beginning of his reign, which is where we are in the book of Esther, right? They wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. Now, they don't tell us what was written this time. But if you look in verse 7, in the days of Artaxerxes, it's still going on. And if you look down in verse 11, I think, it says, this is a copy of the letter that they sent to Artaxerxes. And then you can take time later to read that. So, here, the crux of that letter, and I'm assuming it probably was the same argument to Ahasuerus, the letter that they didn't give us. When you read that letter says, hey, king, you realize those Jews that you let come back over here are building this city back up. And you know when they build this city back up, they're not going to listen to you anymore. And they're going to have their own money. And they're not going to need your money. And they're going to probably build an army and come and attack you. And they're just terrible, horrible, awful people. I mean, the scripture is a whole lot more eloquent than that, okay? But you get the gist. And so it says they even bribed counselors. They bribed lawyers, or they bribed people within the court over in Babylon, over in Shushan, the palace, to try to convince the king that this is not a good thing for these Jews to be coming back over here. And we know Nehemiah had problems with these same people when he was trying to build the wall. So now you see why there's a problem with Mordecai and Esther being Benjaminites, because if people in the palace are being bribed to convince the king that the Benjaminites and the Judeans way over there in Jerusalem are bad people, and they're going to rise up and probably never listen to you, and they have no affection for Babylon or Persia at all. They're not going to pay their taxes to you. They're terrible people. So Mordecai probably didn't really want the fact that he was a Jew, and especially a Benjaminite. But you know what? The cool thing of that story is to think of the unlikelihood that Esther the Jew would be chosen queen is just, that blows our mind. But Esther the Jew that was a Benjaminite and actually got into the palace adds a dimension to that story that if we didn't take the time to look at Benjaminite and exactly why were we told specifically that they were of that tribe, because it increases that kind of conflict factor in the story, right? Also, whenever I teach, I don't mind taking time to kind of fill in history because it helps us, like I said, to understand Scripture better. And this really helps us to understand Scripture a lot better when we get to Luke chapter 10. Anybody off the top of your mind know what's in Luke chapter 10? And it's a story about someone from that Samaritan region, and it involved a Jew. Oh, I didn't think of that one, but I don't. Is that in Luke 10?
I don't know. No, that's what I think of when I.
But that's good. I didn't even think of that story. Thank you, Katie. But I was actually thinking of the Good Samaritan, because they're not. No, but that was great, Katie. They're not good Samaritans, are they? Not according to the pure Jews. And it was a Jew that was walking. What was he walking from Jerusalem to Jericho, or was he walking? Was it opposite? I can't remember now. I did look at it. And the Samaritan, who was not even supposed to be down by Jerusalem or Jericho, happened to be in hostile territory, meets up with this guy, and we of course know the story. There was something I was going to tell you about that. Let me look. Oh, both Jewish and Samaritan religious leaders taught that it was wrong to have any contact with the opposite group, and both was not to enter each other's territories or even speak to one another. Samaritans couldn't testify in Jewish courts. Either was contaminated with evil if passing through the other's territory. So we don't know what brought that Samaritan down into that territory, but based on what I just read, he wasn't supposed to be there, and he would be considered having been contaminated if people found out that he was there. Much less picking up the Jew, putting him on his donkey, taking him to an inn, and paying him like he did. So when you think about the hostility between those groups and why the hostility is there, it makes that story matter a whole lot more, right? So that's why I don't mind taking the time to do that. If it helps, to just give you a deeper appreciation of Scripture, because that's what this whole thing is all about anyway, is to help us love this book a whole lot more. Okie dokie. So, hey, you know what? My watch has stopped, which means we get to go. On I'm serious, it has stopped, so I have no idea what time it is. So somebody's got to let me. What is it? It's 4:58. Okay, thank you. Oh my goodness, this is. Whew. Okay, now I'm good. Well, hang on. No, it's ticking. Oh, you know what I just did? I messed up with the time. I am.
The food's coming.
My word, that is terrible. Okay, how do I trim that off of there? Okay, man. Okay. Well, there's some problems in keeping yourself a secret, like Mordecai was doing. If you're a true Jew, because Jews had, especially with their diet, certain dietary regulations, and we know this from even going back to the book of Daniel, and Daniel's first conflict within the palace had to do with food, right? And so he's like, no, I don't want to eat that. Let me have this for 10 days, and you'll see how buff we get by eating vegetables. But it was because he did not want to compromise on his Jewish laws and what he was supposed to eat. So we know if they were secret Jews, they probably weren't keeping that. Also, all of the problem with the Samaritan people and intermingling and intermarrying, and you're not supposed to do that. Good Jews don't do that, right? So what happens when Esther keeps her Jewish heritage a secret, and then she ends up in a Gentile king's palace as his queen? So now we have intermarriage, but then you could sit back and go, but wait a minute, she didn't have a choice. She got scarfed up. She got taken in. So why? Let's not get into all those big old theological why things. Why did that happen? We know that God had that planned for her to be there. But still, it's okay. But if they were super faithful Jews and kept that law, how could God still use them in the way that he used them and all? And they were so unfaithful. And you know, ask that question out loud. And then take a step back and think, who is actually asking this question? Exactly. Why does God use us? Are we 100% faithful 100% of the time? Absolutely not. And it's a wonderful example of, no, they were not completely faithful Jews, but God used them anyway. Okay? You know, and we could stop and just tell stories of grace all day long, probably in that way. But we're going to move on. So look here in verse 11. Oh, I put it up here on the thing. Look at there. And every day Mordecai walked in front of the court of the harem to learn how Esther was and what was happening to her. Every day. Because when she was gone, he didn't even know if he would ever see her again. We know the story. He didn't know the story. He was living the story, right? We have to remember that. So every day, so his concern, and the words, when you look up original words, it would be he wanted to check on her welfare, her soundness of health, and one of the words, and I saw this in multiple places, meant, when he says how Esther was and what was happening to her, means her welfare and whether she was at peace. You know? And when I read that, it's like, oh, you see that kind of paternal care that Mordecai had for her. They eventually, came to where Esther was over him, right? As queen, she would eventually be over him. But you see, here, before that has even happened, he cared very deeply for her. I like that. So you see in verse 12, now when the turn came for each young woman to go into King Ahasuerus after being 12 months under the regulations. Okay, now when the turn came actually means in the succession or order. And so if you look at that word being that way, then you have to realize, and I think I said this last week, probably not all of those girls showed up at the same time. Because you had 127 provinces from which these girls were being carted in, right? And so probably one province was the Shushan area. We know Esther came from that one. But good grief, remember that map of Persia? The Persian Empire that I put up a couple of weeks ago? And how vast that was? Well, they had to make sure they got the prettiest one. So that meant they went to the far corner. So it would take some longer to get in. So the understanding is that the 12 months of preparation started when the young woman arrived in the harem. And so if Esther got there, let's say within the first month, there might have been some that didn't show up till Esther had been there maybe 2 or 3, 4 months, okay? But then their 12 months would start at that time of arrival. Make sense? That's not deep theology, and that could be very well wrong. All of this stuff is what I read and trying to educate myself on customs. Which I had a really good time doing that, and that's why I can't wait to share some of this with you. Now, why 12 months? Did you stop to think that? You read through it fast? Now, why 12 months? Well, We know they're referred to as virgins or young women or maidens. And we know they're referred to differently when they move to the other house. There's a second house that is mentioned in Scripture. And so the original language means that these are the difference of a girl to when a girl becomes a virgin or young woman or maiden is simply if she has reached childbearing age. So this is where culturally we have a really hard time wrapping our hands around the fact that Esther was 14 when she went into the king, and he was 40. Remember that? And we're thinking, oh, that is so awful. But that was the custom. She legitimately was considered marriageable as soon as she had reached the age of being able to have children. So, thankfully, we don't pull that off in our culture, but that's what they did. So we have to give some leeway there, even though in our minds, because we are so against such stuff, in our culture now. Let's get our hands around that. So, why 12 months then? Because they get these young girls in there, and they're isolated for this time because they have to make sure none of them come in actually pregnant at the time that they arrive. Because any children born within this harem have to be of royal blood, right? Of the royal line. Have to be the king or belong to the king. So they put them in there, and they're just in, it's an isolation thing just to make sure no children are born to this group of women that are not the king's kids. Okay? The next thing is probably for some education, because you have gone far-reaching to bring these girls in, and one of them will be the queen. Now, others of them can be the king's wives. Others of them will be the concubines. And we'll talk about that in just a minute and what is the difference between those, because I have something to read you about that. So, I read something that referred to it as perhaps a charm school, where they had to, you had to get kind of some refinement to some of these girls. They far-reaching, you bring these in, you don't know what kind of training some of these girls have had. So we're going to clean them up, and we're going to make them act like queens. All right? So probably some education in there. And then it took 12 months, according to Persian customs, to get each one of these girls in optimal health. Because, you think about it, you're going to love this. The only qualification was that she had to be a beautiful virgin. That was it. Remember those guys going, hey, king, we're just going to send out and we're going to find you the prettiest one. But you got to remember that sometimes pretty is poor, right? So, didn't you love that? I have so much fun. Pretty can be poor. And when they went out, who knows? You could have a beautiful, beautiful girl, but she could have been living in conditions that were just abysmal. And who knows what kind of crud she would be bringing into this house. And, when I was in college, I lived in a dormitory, and one person got sick. The entire dormitory got sick. So can you imagine if you get, a girl brought in from, the far northeastern corner of the empire, and she's got lice. Oh, my goodness. Well, that means 399 other people are at risk for getting lice, right? I know, it's gross. So, everybody scratch. So anyway, so we have 12 months to clean up these girls. And they have their rituals and things, and that's what is fun to kind of talk about now. So we see this purification process. Now, on a cursory reading through the scripture, if you don't stop to kind of investigate these things, here's what you find. Well, we know back in verse 9, when Esther was taken into the custody of Haggai, remember he quickly made sure that she had her cosmetics. I'm in verse 9, right? Quickly made sure that she had her cosmetics and her portion of food, because some of the things that I read, well, of course, if you don't eat well, you're not going to be healthy. So they're going to make sure that these girls ate well, good food, Probably some of them needed to be fattened up some, they just might not have been in good health because of their diet. Also, one thing or two things or three, I don't know how many I read, said that it was kind of common for some of the food that they customarily ate actually made you smell funny. And so they couldn't have that. It just kind of oozed, the odor oozed from their skin. And so they could have that, so they had to make sure that they didn't eat things that actually worked against the perfumes and things that they were going to have to wear. So the purification process started with a change of diet. Then in verse 12, we see, now when the turn came for each young woman to go into the king, after being 12 months under the regulations for the women, since this was the regular period of their beautifying, here's how it's broken down. 6 months with oil of myrrh, and 6 months with spices and ointments for women. So, what in the world would we need oil of myrrh for? And I put this up there to show you what myrrh looks like, because to me, myrrh was just at Christmas time, right? You got the gold and the frankincense and the myrrh. Never really stopped to think, why myrrh? What do you need? We also know that myrrh was present at, well, not really at Christ's birth, but early on, and then also at his death, right? Because he had an opportunity to have that mixed with, was it wine? Vinegar, yes. And it was to help be a deadening agent for pain for Jesus on the cross. And he refused it, remember? But anyway, oil of myrrh. You have these myrrh trees, which are very, very spiny trees. And apparently, I've never harvested myrrh, so all I can do is, by what I read, you would either strip bark off of the tree, or you would, I guess you could do that. You could also, after you strip the bark off, you could wound the tree, and the tree would ooze this golden sap or whatever it was like resin. It was oily when it would ooze out, but quickly when it would hit the air, it would start getting more gummy. And so then you could end up with these like rock-looking kind of chunks, which are, a gummy thing. And I'm thinking, okay, well, that would be a great gift. I'm Mary, and I just birthed the baby Jesus, and I get a bowl of rocks. There's something, there's got to be more to this myrrh than that picture. Well, there is. Myrrh was very valuable, and actually at times more valuable than gold. It's a very valuable thing. I think it was very hard to harvest. I don't know how rare the trees are, but it was very hard to harvest. And it was very valuable because of all of the things that myrrh could do. And so for us, let's think about this for a minute. You have Ahasuerus. He has harems of people, of women, right? We know he has just acquired approximately 400. I've read 360 to 400 more. And part of their purification regimen is to use myrrh, something that is far more valuable than gold. So we know this man had extreme riches in order to be able to even just provide these girls with this. But what they would do, from what I read, is that they would take these rocks or these chunks of resin and melt them down, heat them up, and they would get oily again. They would mix them with like olive oil or something. And you remember we looked at that word, the purification last time? And I said, what was it? It meant a body scouring or scrubbing. And I made some comment about that. Doesn't sound like a very fun spa day, right? But that's what they would do. They would take this oil of myrrh, and I don't know how many times a day, but it was for the first 6 months at least, would scour themselves. They would rub this in and scour themselves with this because it was a great antiseptic. So any rashes, lesions, wounds, whatever you want to call it, that these women could have come in with were cleaned up by this process of oil of myrrh. That's why it is set aside, and then we're told, other spices and ointments for the next 6 months. But oil of myrrh was like this. It was the thing, and it cured everything, apparently. It is reported that this would stimulate circulation, decrease inflammation, soothe inflamed skin, prevent wrinkles, heal fungal infections, heal mouth sores, and repel parasites and insects. Would take care of that lice issue. The olive oil was sometimes mixed with honey, then mixed with the myrrh, and it was a great moisturizer. Don't you just want to go out and plant a myrrh tree? You know, this
1999.
this this just takes care of everything. So then we're told, like the next 6 months, we're told of spices. In the ESV, the KJV says sweet odors, which leads us to believe that that is more of a perfume regimen that they would have. And so I thought, okay, so what did they get? So I read up a lot, and there's all kinds of things that come up. So I picked like the 4 that repeated throughout all the stuff that I read. And so we know that balsam was one, and they would take these little flowery plant, flowers or blooms off the balsam plant. I don't know if they use the leaves or not or whatever. And most of all of these things they would crush into powders or gels. But this is supposed to be very fragrant. And of course I'm thinking balsam, I'm thinking, oh, the Christmas wreath I hang on the door every Christmas, pine. Oh yeah, Esther the Queen smells like pine tree. That's what I'm thinking. No, apparently this balsam plant over there on that part of the world is not what they grow in Maine, for Christmas wreaths. Supposed to smell pretty good. Then you have rose. Rose was very popular over there, and so I looked up and thought, okay, well, there's a million kinds of different roses. So I tried to find the most common rose that would have been in Persia at that time, and it looked very similar to this, and it was very fragrant rose, and the petals would be boiled, and rose water would be made, and they would use this rose water and probably bathe in it or whatever, make themselves smell really good. Aloe was another thing. And also, some of these have medicinal qualities, too. Now, aloe, I always just thought aloe is what you're supposed to break and rub on your finger or whatever when you burned it. You ever done that? Or sunburn? But anyway, aloe was another one that came up a lot. And then there's frankincense, which, of course, in its name, we see incense. Very, very potent, very, very fragrant, and harvested very much the same way as myrrh. And so it's very valuable. So I'm thinking, okay, that's why we have gold and we have frankincense and we have myrrh. Probably the 3 most valuable trading commodities of that area in that time. So anyway, so frankincense looks a lot like myrrh. I don't know if, you go to buy myrrh, if they slip in frankincense, or I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell them apart, but I'm sure some people could. So then we're told after spices, the ESV tells us we have ointments. The KJV says, and with other things. Don't you love how specific that is? But I looked up, it's ointments, it's other things to enhance just beauty treatments, more or less. So, well, what did they use? Well, turmeric. That looks familiar. This would give a glow to the skin. It can actually lighten the skin. I read that multiple times. I'm thinking, no, that looks like that would turn you orange. Mm-hmm. So you go home and you start rubbing that on you. You're going to lighten your skin, or you're going to look like the Oompa Loompa of Persia. But that's why maybe if you put that on, you get out in that Middle Eastern sun, maybe that would do that. But they really wanted light skin. They wanted paleness. And if you think of where the Middle East is, probably not too many people were very pale, unless they just never came out of their tent, right?
Like a Shulamite woman. She was dark because she was out laboring and she didn't want him to think poorly of her.
Exactly. So, along those lines, the paleness actually would indicate upper class because you didn't have to go out and work. So they wanted them pale. And so they got turmeric treatments. But it also is a good hair remover, apparently. And it helps with indigestion, throat infections, common colds, liver ailments. I don't know, if you rub that on you, how would you ever know if your liver was acting up or not? Because you'd look kind of jaundiced.
You eat it. Like my mom eats it every day. She has turmeric every day to help with inflammation. No, I don't think it's actually the chew is
How's her hair right here?
But you can also get turmeric. Turmeric's in a capsule too.
Yeah, I think
And you
yeah,
can,
she takes
yep.
it. Yeah.
Yep, and I know people take it for the inflammation. They take it for GI issues. So yeah, see, some of these things still used today. I told my daughters, I said, I feel like I need to have some like essential oil distributor person coming and setting up a table or something. I know. Yeah, really, he's gonna get some olive oil and rub your feet in it. Okay, now here we go. We have terebinth, or it's actually called a turpentine tree as well. And I'm thinking, okay, but these little berries or whatever they would crush down, this will kill lice, just so you know. So I guess maybe they would crush this down, they'd wash their hair in it, whatever. It also treats chest and lung conditions, and it helps with pain. Cinnamon was another one that came up a lot. So if you're thinking, very strong odors, something that would smell really good, I mean, that's why they use cinnamon, and you still do that. And then cardamom seeds. They would be used for digestive problems. And I read a lot about cardamom that I didn't want to share with you about digestive problems and how that it would help your digestive problems. But apparently this is like, would put every gastroenterologist out of a job if we all just chewed on cardamom seeds, apparently. It is, isn't it? But I don't even know what it tastes like, though. But you think about it, though, if they had a change of diet, because several of these things were to treat digestion and GI issues and everything. I'm thinking, these poor girls. Then again, they were ripped out of their homes. I mean, talk about stress. And I don't know where your stress goes. Maybe your shoulders get tight or whatever. But when I am under stress, the stomach's the first thing that falls to that one, right? And so they apparently dealt in these harems with quite a bit of GI issues and new diet that they were given that could not be good. So cardamom was the next thing. Yeah, I don't know how many bathrooms were actually in that harem, Man.
There were 399.
I know. I don't think they each had one in their own room. And think about it too. If they had 390 or 400 new women brought in, Esther had 7 maidens assigned to her. Now, I don't know if each one maybe got a maid to help her with all. There's a lot of things that this poor girl from Northeast Persia has to figure out, right? So they had some maids in there to help too. There was a lot of women in these houses. So let's look. Let's look at the procedure that we're told here in verse 13 and 14. What happens? They have gone through their 12 months. They are in optimal health after 12 months of this purification process. So in verse 13, when the young woman went into the king in this way, she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the harem to the king's palace. In the evening, she would go in the morning she would return to the second harem, or depends on which version you read. The KJV calls it a house. And I like that because of when you pull up that word, what it means. In the custody of, and I love this guy's name, but it's so hard to say, Sha'ashgaz. Sha'ashgaz. The king's, yes, the king's eunuch who was in charge of the concubines. Now, several things to point out in this. Let's back up. When the young woman went into the king, she was given whatever she desired to take. Probably accessories. So you could look around if she wanted to wear, jewelry, whatever. But it could also be that when she was going in, she maybe wanted to set an atmosphere that was memorable. So she could call in entertainment to come in, perhaps. This is all speculation. I wasn't there. I just read a lot, and I try to be selective in what I read. But most likely it's probably accessories or, how she did her hair, pins in her hair, whatever. Anything to try to make her memorable. That was the plan. Because if he didn't remember her, he didn't call her back. And, there's a lot of people to remember. If you're talking 400 new faces, plus this was not, his first rodeo. He had other houses. He had harems, So you had to be memorable. So we're told that she would go in at, let's see, verse 14. In the evening, that is literally sundown, she would go in, and in the morning, literally, the sun up, she would return to the second house. So we get a little procedural education here, in that they're in one house, which Mordecai walked back and forth in front of every day, right? Because now that we know there's a second house, then maybe he was hoping that he would be told, oh, she's not in here anymore. And then he would know that she had been moved to the other house, right? And then he would know where she was in that process. Also, think about it. You have all of these women living in this harem, and it's Sue's time to, not Sue, I shouldn't use Sue because we have a Sue. Jane. Is there a Jane? It's Jane's time to go. And I know that tonight is Jane's. And I've lived with Jane now for however long I've been in there. She's been in there for at least 12 months. And I will not see Jane until I'm on the other side. So there's no report back. There's no girl going and then coming back in at sun up the next morning going, let me tell you, the guy's ugly or whatever. You know, there's no report back. You didn't get any, leverage that way. That's why it's really kind of neat when you see the relationship that Haggai, the keeper of the women, had with Esther, because he knew the king. Nobody else knew him. So he knew. Because we are told that it's time for Esther to go in. I'm probably jumping ahead of myself, but let's look. That was 15. Go back in the middle of 15. It says, when it's time for Esther to go into the king, she asked for nothing except what Haggai, the king's eunuch, who had charge of the women, advised. You see the humility that Esther had? Instead of trying to strategize and think, oh, my hair looks better this way, or I think I want to wear this, or I think I'll call in some musical people to play whatever they played back in those days, or sing, she deferred to the one person that would actually have any kind of knowledge as to what the king would like. That was pretty wise of a 14-year-old gal, wasn't it? So when we are told in verse 14 that they go into this second house, it's interesting. It says, Sha'ash-Gaz, the king's eunuch, was in charge of the concubines. There is a total different status change now. Before, it's the young women, the maidens, were told way up, under the care, the custody of Haggai, the keeper of the women. Women is a completely different word than concubine in the scripture when you look at them. And one is the young maiden virgin, and the other one is considered a wife. So it's a complete change of status when you go into that second house. But remember, when you go into that second house, you are still under the custody of Sha'ash-Gaz, the eunuch, and you don't get out. It is a prison, but you're taken well care of because you are actually now, the property of the king. So you're taken care of, but you're still not allowed to leave, and you're always under guard. Let me read this to you about concubines. I found this very interesting. It's a little long, but hopefully you'll find it interesting too. If not, just put your head down. I'll let you know when I'm done. Yeah. Okay, in ancient times, a concubine was a woman living in a lawful marriage arrangement with a man, but whose status was regarded as being less than a wife. Their children were regarded as legitimate, although the children of the wife or wives who were most often given preference in matters of inheritance, the children of the wives were most often given preference in matters of inheritance. I really can read. In the cases of royalty, only wives could bear heirs to the throne. Now, a wife of the king had a higher standing in the palace. She ate with the king, and all of the concubines had to obey her. Now, pay close attention to this. So, you imagine living with all of these other women, and then one of them will be chosen queen, Some of them will be chosen as wives, and the rest will just be concubines. So you are in Haggai's house, all equal. You go to Shaashgaz's house, and now you've got all kinds of, hierarchical, one will be a queen, she won't be in that house. Then you'll have some that are considered wives, and you'll have some that will be concubines. I don't exactly know how the king chose those that he, I guess it'll be his favorites. I know when I was reading about the northern and southern kingdom, that map, I read that Rehoboam had 18 wives. And I can't remember how many concubines. It was like 60-something. It wasn't like huge, but he had that differentiation too. I don't know who his queen was. Scripture may say, but I didn't have time to read the whole Bible before I came tonight. But anyway, the chief wife, or the queen consort, was privileged to wear on her head a royal tiara or crown. She was the acknowledged head of the female apartments, and the concubines recognized her dignity by actually bowing down. Once again, in one house you're completely equal. By the time you get to the other house, you got to bow down to some of the ones you were just completely equal with, perhaps the day before, right? On great occasions, when the king entertained the men of the court, she feasted with all the females in her own part of the palace. We know that from chapter 1, don't we? The men had a feast, the women had a feast. She had a large revenue of her own, assigned her, not so much by the will of her husband as by an established law or custom. Her dress was splendid. She was able to indulge freely in a lavish lifestyle. Though legally subject to her husband as much as the basis of his slaves, she could venture on liberties which would have been fatal to almost anyone else, and often, by her influence over the monarch, possessed a very considerable share of power. But we still know that they still had to have permission to approach the king, right? Because we know that is very, pivotal, or to the story as we go on. Each wife had probably a suite of apartments to herself and a certain number of attendants at her disposal. Concubines had none of the privileges which made the position of chief wife so important. The concubines seem to have occupied a distinct part of the king's court called the second house of women. They were in special charge of one of the eunuchs and were no doubt kept under strict surveillance. The empire was continually searched for beautiful damsels. We'll see that coming up very soon, because very soon there's going to be another search for more, because he's just got to keep collecting. There has to be a constant succession being required, as none shared the king's bed more than once unless she attracted the monarch's regard very particularly. Concubines accompanied the king both in his wars and in his hunting expeditions. It was a part of their duty to sing and play for the royals and to perform this task whenever beckoned, sometimes all night, but almost always through meals. They were the ones beckoned for entertainment during times of drunken feasting. So it should have been a concubine called for at that first feast instead of Queen Vashti, right? Performing acts that a king would consider too lewd for one of his wives to perform. Many concubines were brought in as spoils of war. They were non-marriageable and held in seclusion for the rest of their lives. What a life. But you know how when Esther could request anything, or any of the women could request anything, I said it could be entertainment. They could have asked for some of the concubines to have come, and that would have been a concubine's job, when it come, and sing or play instruments or whatever during the meals and provide entertainment. So that could have been one of the things that they could have requested. So we already talked about how Esther in verse 15 deferred to Haggai's judgment. She knew the king better, or he knew the king better than she did, so that shows her humility. And then we see this in verse 15 again, which is just an awesome verse. And Esther obtained favor. She was lifted up and respected. And now, we also talked about how this could be, last week we talked about, when it was mentioned earlier, that obtained can also be something that she is doing. She is lifting up. Now, favor was shown toward her, but let's not forget that favor was shown toward her because of what she was lifting up back toward them. It was really kind of a two-way thing. In the sight of, which means before the eyes of, or to see, literally to see, of all of them that discerned her. Simply put, Esther lived in a way that when these people that she lived with saw her, they saw her for what she really was, and what they were seeing was actually what Esther was. You ever know anybody that could actually look one way and look the part, but was just a terrible person? In fact, it was interesting because this morning I was reading in Matthew 23, and I forgot what verse it was because I was going to remember it. But it had to do with Jesus was talking to the Pharisees. And he's like, you look all religious on the outside, but inside you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. I can't remember what verse that was, like 27 or something like that. I thought, hey, that sounds just like this with verse 15. She was respected by those who saw her because they saw what they saw was what she really was. They discerned her to be what she was trying to get people to see her to be. Instead of trying to get somebody to think of me one way, but really, I'm another way over here. Refer to that as just wearing an image. Do you really know? Do I really know Dana? Or do I really know the Dana that Dana has wanted me to know? Right?
You know Dana.
That's what we love about it.
Exactly. And that's what Esther was. She had earned this respect. The king even saw it, because that's what we're told on down, let's see, I think in verse 17. But we're not there yet. Now pay attention. Pay attention. I laughed so hard at home. I didn't even know how to do that. And I'm reading helps under the keynote thing. How do you add music, in there?
Are you at home by yourself?
Well, most of the time because I have to be, so it's quiet. Yes.
Yeah.
If anybody ever walked in, I would be so committed. I have a great way of entertaining myself. But anyway, Esther wins. The king loved Esther. Look at verse 17. Well, back up. And when Esther was taken, same words that we saw earlier in the chapter about these girls being taken to the house. So we know that it was still a custody thing. She didn't, just bebop over there. It was when her time had come. She was taken, I lost my place, to King Ahasuerus into his royal palace, and then we're given a specific date. The timeline person in me loves this, right? It's in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. So we know this is 479. And Esther's approximately 14 years old. The king loved Esther more than all of the women. Pay attention to that. More than all the women. And she won grace and favor in his sight more than all of the virgins. I love how it is so specific to let us know, didn't matter which house, Esther rose to the top. Now, we aren't given this a great bit of information to know. I mean, in our minds, we want to think, okay, she went in there, and he just loved her, and he was done. Right? Don't need these other ones. I have found my queen. Maybe it happened that way, but we're not told. And the fact that, some could say, he said he loved her more than the women, so that would be the ones in the second house, and then he loved her more than all those virgins, that would be the ones in that first house, so he must have been done. But we know this king wasn't done that quickly, because in just a couple of verses, we're going to find that he does another whole search to bring in a whole bunch of another crew of young women to expand his harem more. So I don't know, maybe he kept going on his schedule, but he remembered Esther. I don't know when in the course of all of this, if he worked his way through all 400 and then decided on Esther. We have no clue. Maybe that's just why we're given the date that it's the 7th year of his reign. And we're supposed to be happy with that, and I will be. So we won't beat that anymore. So she was chosen, and then she was appointed. The royal crown was set on her head. And then look what happens. And then we're done. In verse 18, then the king gave a great feast. Ah, another feast. What number is this? How many have we had? 4. We've had 4 feasts so far. What are they? You remember? The first one? Well, the first one lasted how long? 6 months, 180 days, right? Then at the end of 180 days, the king gave one for everyone that lasted 7 days. And then concurrently, the women were having one. So then now we have Esther's feast. Now, I love the fact, see, I like to eat. I love the fact, too, that we're told that it's called, it got a name. It was Esther's feast. Isn't that great? No, maybe he didn't call it that, but it was a feast to honor Esther. He also granted a remission of taxes to the provinces and gave gifts with royal generosity. Let's just dissect that and see what that means. The celebration. We have a feast named for Esther. It included all of his officials and servants. So it wasn't just for nobility. It was for everybody to celebrate. It says we are told that there's a remission of taxes. So the provinces were probably told, just keep your money for a while. That would be great news, right? So everybody's happy. Why does he do this? Well, he loves Esther, but it doesn't mean everybody else has to love Esther. But if the king loving Esther means he's going to have a feast and means he's not going to make us pay taxes, then I'm going to love Esther, right? Wouldn't you love Esther? Yeah, if I don't have to pay taxes, I'll love Esther. It also says he gave gifts with royal generosity, which could be interpreted instead of collecting taxes from these provinces, the king actually poured some money into them. I'm really going to love Esther if that happens, right? It was probably considered a holiday. Probably people didn't have to work. And perhaps even slaves were freed. So it was a big deal. Some of these are perhapses. The scripture gives us a little bit, about the remission of taxes and whatnot. But what we know is that it was a huge, huge deal. Because now he's got his queen. And life is supposed to be just wonderful for not only the king, but for everybody in Persia. And that's what he's trying to stage, he's trying to set by having his new queen. So, if you'll look at the little sheet that I passed around to you, you'll see that for next week we've got 3, I don't even have one of my own, but we have three chapters. Thank you, Phyllis. Chapters 8 through 10 in the book, and then it'll be Esther 2:19, where we just finished tonight, so we're right on schedule, and we'll go through the end of chapter 3. 3:15 is the end of chapter 3.